Hi there, this is Matt Ertz, Vice President of the Association of Public Historians in New York State. We are here recording a presentation with James Odato. So I'm going to get a little bit of a background and then turn it over to James. James Odato has had a journalism career rooted in watchdog reporting and has been cited as one of New York's top news hounds covering state government, gambling and abuse, and waste of public money. He's written thousands of articles, his byline has appeared in numerous national publications, and his investigative stories have spurred reforms. He has been a staff reporter for several newspapers. He has worked as a freelance journalist and college journalism instructor. His talk today will involve the work that went into unearthing the fascinating life of Lucy Gwin, who became a leading disability rights activist and advocacy journalist in Rochester, New York in 1990. The story of how she came to this calling drew Odato to a university archive, public historians, libraries, private collections, and several online repositories of data and information, all of which opened up leads for dozens of personal interviews. His biography on Lucy Gwin is set to be released by the University of Massachusetts Press on October 29, 2021, almost exactly 17 years after her death. Without further ado, Jim, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, this is Jim Odato, and I just wanted to introduce myself really briefly before I explain to you how valuable public historians and public repositories of information have been to me for this project and for projects indeed in my career as a journalist. You see the backdrop here is a cover of Mouth magazine, which was the publication that Lucy Gwin worked on for and published for 18 years. And I never heard of Lucy Gwin before 2018. And just to indicate why I was even looking at Lucy Gwin, it's because I have had in my adult life a constant quest to find a good story to write. I have been a reporter full-time for many newspapers, several newspapers, since around 1977, when I graduated from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst as an English and journalism major. And as a full-time reporter on the staff of several papers, I've always tried to find stories that no one would have done if I hadn't been on the planet. And you try every year to get a few of those stories published to feel satisfied. I discontinued working full-time as a journalist and started writing freelance pieces. And I had a goal to try to write stories for magazines. And so one of the things I learned as a result of being exposed to some fantastic English professors, particularly at the University at Albany, is the value of archival research. And so when I was done teaching my journalism class at UAlbany, it ended in May of 2018, I went on a campaign to find a good story, a very good story, potentially a profile, maybe even a biography of someone worth writing about. And I started examining online the finding aids at various archives at higher education schools within a couple hour drive from my house in upstate New York. And so that brought me, of course, I looked at UAlbany's and Union colleges, and I drove out to Hamilton College and Cornell, and I saved perhaps the most intriguing of the items that I had circled for last. And that was at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And it's just by coincidence. And on the 25th floor of the tallest library in North America at the UMass campus is the archives. And if you go there, you will find 6 boxes of records, papers, manuscripts, song lyrics, poems, every copy of Mouth magazine, legal papers, personal papers, journals, photographs in the Lucy Gwin collection. And the Lucy Gwin collection I sat down with in June of 2018. I finally got to UMass after wandering around elsewhere in May. In June, early June, I think it was maybe the 2nd of June. And I was up there reading her material, and the words were just exploding off the page. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a woman who really could write. She put sentences together very effectively. That alone interested me about her. However, her story was fascinating. And I'm thinking, how many people know about this woman? And I didn't think many. So in a couple of paragraphs, let me just tell you about this woman. In 1990, she opened up and created this magazine, which is initially was called This Brain Has a Mouth. And it was a magazine published in Rochester, New York, starting in July of 1990. Coincidentally and significantly, July 1990 is when George H. Bush, excuse me, the first Bush, signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law. And in the Rose Garden outside the White House. And it was the significant piece of legislation that was essentially the Civil Rights Act for people with disabilities in America. Now, Lucy Gwin identified herself as a member of that community. And the reason she did, and this is laid out in her papers, is because in June of 1989, she got into a terrible car accident in Rochester, New York. And she went from being a very successful, creative, aggressive advertising professional to a person who suffered a traumatic brain injury. And she went to a rehab facility in Cortland, New York, where she believed her treatment was a scam, a fraud. And she broke out of that facility, left it, went back to Rochester, New York, an angry, recovering from brain injury woman. And she tried to get investigatory agencies to investigate the chain that ran the rehab facility that she was at, and was semi-successful. But it takes a long time to do these things. So she decided to open up a magazine. And initially the magazine was about people with brain injuries, for people with brain injuries, and like herself. And it was to give them a voice, to talk about how they have a legal right, like any patient, to get answers to questions and to have some agency over their treatment, and to be treated as a human being. And her pieces were the pieces in the magazine were in many cases first person stories from people like her who had gone through the hell of rehab or were institutionalized. And it was, in many ways, what she did in her magazine was she captured all the things that she had learned as an advertising professional and as a writer, and was able to highlight that kind of work in a magazine. So it ran, and she operated it for 18 years until her death in 2014. And that was 7 years ago. So here I am. I'm working. I'm reading her papers at the University of Massachusetts, and I'm thinking, wow, who knows about these people? Indeed, I'm thinking to myself, as I got into it, I'm thinking to myself, how many people can name anyone, any leader in the long march toward the ADA, and since then, any leader in the disability rights movement. I think that if you interviewed baby boomers like myself and asked them, name someone from the civil rights movement, name someone from the Black Lives movement, name someone from the anti-war movement, that being the anti-Vietnam War movement. And you can come up with 2 or 3 names. You can come up with Angela Davis. You can come up with Abby Hoffman. You can come up with Martin Luther King, right? Who from the disability rights movement can you name? So I'm thinking to myself, Lucy became a leader in this movement. And she was not the leader, and she was perhaps not in the top tier, but she was someone who gave a voice to the estimated 53 million people in America with some sort of a disability. And as time went on, her magazine dropped its name as This Brain Has a Mouth and simply became Mouth, because what she did was she included not just the brain injured, but those people who have identified as a member of Disability Nation for one reason or another. And that's a pretty big group. She was very inclusive. So how did public repositories help me in my research? How about greatly? And I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to start with you, which should help you perhaps identify some of these things. I have here a picture, this Unearthing a Fascinating Life. Now, I have a book that's coming out. This is one of the reasons I wanted to share this information with you. I have a book that's coming out called This Brain Had a Mouth, and it's all about Lucy, and it's her biography. And in order to write a biography, you really have to do more than just look at records in an archive. But the records in the UMass archive were the backbone of this research, and it provided me a lot of material. This is a picture of me in the archive. I hope you can see the I hope you can see me. I'm not here to show me really, but the stacks of boxes in the background. And I have on my ears headphones that the UMass provided me, and a tape recorder that they provided me, a cassette recorder, so that I could listen to some tapes that they also had in their archive of Lucy. And in that, on those tapes, there was a folk history, an oral history done by a oral historian, and I got to hear her voice, and it was really exciting the first time I heard it. Now, other things you would find I would find among the things that I found in the UMass archive were records like this one. And if you can see it, it is a journal entry. And the journal entry was some very personal observations. And they were entries that were done shortly after her departure, her escape from the New Medico rehab facility in Cortland, New York, when she started writing down her thoughts as her memory started to clear and the fog started to go away. And these narratives, these recollections, these fragments helped me learn more about her background, her present at the time. And they were very valuable. And they also helped me identify her handwriting, which to me became important. Now, these were among papers that were typed papers, legal papers, and other things that were helpful in my research. Now, okay, let me just show. All right, now this might be a little bit easier for you to see. I hope you see the stacks in the background and the research area on the 25th floor of the UMass archive. Okay, there's that. My dad threw us out. This was a really personal recollection that helped. It was one of many pages that helped me very much as I tried to figure out who was Lucy before Lucy became the disability rights activist. See, what I wanted to write about a woman and her whole life, not just about the life that incorporated the 18 years of Mouth magazine. So what I wanted to figure out is, how did Lucy become Lucy? Okay, now another thing I found in the UMass archive is this item right here. And it is, as you can see, it was a personal ad that was in a newspaper, an alternative weekly newspaper in Rochester, New York, called the City Newspaper. And Lucy took out a number of ads in that paper, including this one. In case you can't read it, it says personal ad number 1. This is, she typed out and saved a lot of her things. And one of the things she saved is this item right here, which was the copy of what ended up being published in the City Newspaper. And she was dating. This was back in the 80s. She is a woman who enjoyed the company of men. And she was doing something before online dating. She was putting her ads in this newspaper. And it says here, everything once, nothing twice, loving woman with perhaps a too fascinating history, wants a one-of-a-kind man with a sense of direction and a history of his own to tell. Statistics unimportant if you've got heart, soul, and guts. Object, more fun than anyone has a right to expect. Drop first name and phone to box 5682, City Newspaper. Okay, now she knew how to write an ad. She had an advertising background. She worked for advertising firms in Indianapolis, Chicago, and then eventually in Rochester. And she was working for a Rochester relatively small Rochester ad firm at this time when she wrote this ad. And why is this important? I'll tell you in a minute. Okay. Also in the slideshow, I started with this particular slide because it is illustrative of the covers and the wit of Lucy and what she put into every edition of Mouth. And Mouth came out every 2 months. This particular Mouth featured Lady Liberty in a wheelchair, and it became a recurring image in many of the Mouths, and also in some of the material that Lucy created to help bring in revenues to pay for Mouth. Mouth was a not-for-profit 501c3, and she refused to take advertising, which is kind of interesting because she came from the advertising business. But she decided that she didn't want to have any influence on Mouth. She wanted it to be an independent outfit. So she ended up selling lockets and bumper stickers and T-shirts and things like that she created, sometimes with these kinds of images. Okay, so one of the things that I reached out to do once I was done, actually I had many visits to the UMass library in order to try to make sure I could document what was in there. I was photographing key pages. I was reading copies of Mouth. The UMass archive has every copy of the Mouth magazine, and taking lots of pictures, documenting, taking notes. This is before what would eventually happen, that this repository was digitized. And a lot of things happened over the 3 years that I researched this project and wrote it. And one of the things that did happen is I wanted to make sure that Lucy was a credible narrator, that I could trust what she wrote and what she said. Now, what she said was that she got into a car accident in Rochester in 1989, had a traumatic brain injury, and actually the hospital records are in her UMass file. So I can document that those things happened. She said she was transferred to a rehab facility that gave her less than adequate care. As a matter of fact, she thought they were scam artists that were doing nothing more than bilking the insurance company for somewhere hundreds of dollars a day for her care, where indeed her care was nothing more than smoking cigarettes at a picnic table outside, and occasionally learning things like how to use how to play Trivial Pursuit or something like that. So I wanted to see if it was true that she broke out of that facility, as she claimed in her papers. And I was trying to figure out how to learn that. So one of the things I thought about was there was indeed an investigation of New Medico, and she took credit for it in the pages of Mouth. And the FBI indeed raided New Medico in the 90s. It was a big raid, and they took away boxes and boxes of records from the Massachusetts headquarters and from some of the satellite offices of New Medico, some of the rehab facilities. So I figured I would use the Freedom of Information Act to get the FBI file. I did get the FBI file. It took a little while. I also wanted to see if there was an FBI file on Lucy, because she was an agitator. During her career as an activist, she did things in public. She showed up at protests. She organized protests. She organized a protest outside the United States Supreme Court in 1997, which drew a lot of protesters protesting the right to die lobby. At the time, the Supreme Court justices were considering a lawsuit involving some of the things that doctor-assisted suicide or doctor-assisted deaths were trying to accomplish. So I thought maybe the FBI had done an inquiry of her or opened a file of her. So the Freedom of Information Act provided nothing on Lucy, provided a great deal on New Medico. So when I did get the New Medico file, it was pretty thick, about, it's about 1.5 inches thick. There was, thank God, there were lots of references to what they were up to, the complaints they were receiving. Lucy claimed to be writing letters left and right to every investigatory agency in New York State, federally, lawmakers, you name it. And she was, no question, an agitator who got the attention of federal inquiry. Now, there was in the FBI file, there was a clip from a publication called Probe. And the clip, in this New Medico file, it was a clip from a 1992, December 1991 article. And it quotes Lucy Gwin. And it quotes her talking about her escape from New Medico's facility in Cortland, New York. And it quotes the individual who helped break her out, the ex-boyfriend who drove out from Rochester to Cortland and got her. And she was trying to get out. She was there for over 3 weeks. And she felt that it was a scam. She was getting more and more angry. They didn't tie her up. She was there voluntarily, although she was prescribed to be there. And her adult daughter had agreed to this when she was still at the hospital in Rochester, recovering from the initial trauma of the accident. So they transferred her to New Medico. She's looking around there and realizing day in and day out, it was a waste of her time to be there, and she was angry. But she had no money, no car, no nothing. This man who went and got her, in the FBI file, there was a lot of valuable things, a lot of things that allowed me to use words like subpoena and raid and grand jury, because it's all laid out in there. Now, the complainants their names are all redacted, so I couldn't get names of people who were filing complaints, but they were all over the place in that file. But there were 2 words in there that were so important. It was the first and last name. So one of the other things that helped me in my pursuit of this story is using a people finder. Initially, I used something called PIPL, P-I-I-P-L, or PIPL.com. But after a while, that during the 3 years that I was working on this project, PIPL became an expensive proposition. And so I started using something called fastpeoplesearch.com, and I can't recommend it enough. It helped me find loads of people. I interviewed over roughly 135 people for this project. But the most important initial call I made was to this individual in Rochester, New York, who was still alive. And when I called him out of the blue and said I was writing about Lucy Gwin, I was thinking about doing a long form piece on her. And I understood that he was the man who went and got her out of that New Medico facility. Is it true? And he told me about his vivid memories of driving down there in his pickup truck and getting her and breaking her out, indeed, and how it was tense because they were trying to prevent him from doing that. They were telling him that he was taking responsibility for someone who was at risk of being harmed because she needed the attention and care that they could give her there, and that this was on him. So he told me about that breakout. It confirmed a key portion of her story, and that was very important to me. And I asked him, because at that point I was already thinking, this woman could be more than a magazine piece. This woman could be a biography. And I said, as I asked many people eventually, I asked him, do you think that she would be a good subject for a book? And he said, are you kidding me? She'd be a good subject for a movie. And I had a great interview with him. And it was the beginning of numerous interviews that I had over time with people who remember Lucy vividly, who hadn't thought of her in 25, 30, 35 years. And she left a big impression on a lot of people, good and bad. So anyway, Freedom of Information Act helped me, and so did public repositories. I went on a search. I was trying to find out about Lucy's marriages. Lucy was married 3 times. And the first marriage happened shortly after she got out of high school in Indianapolis in 1960. At the age of 17, she was pregnant, and she married her first husband. This is the marriage record, which the Indiana State Library provides marriage documents that they have on record. And it was such an important document to have because it shows the date, the name of the fellow she married, where, etc. And the reason that was so important is because I had a keen interest in interviewing some people who knew Lucy early in her life, including perhaps her first husband and perhaps her 2 daughters. Now, Ancestry.com was helpful, but here is something I wanted to share with you in connection with Ancestry, and maybe you already know this, you public historians and history buffs and biographers, but it was something I didn't know until I started playing around with Ancestry.com, and it is how it's unreliable and downright inaccurate. Although it is providing some information right here that's accurate. It says she got married the 30th of July, 1960. That checks with the marriage license that Indiana State University provided. And it checks with, it says Lucy Gwin, but it has the name of the individual who she married. His name is misspelled. It's different than the official record. So that threw me for a while because I was searching for this individual, and it wasn't easy it took time. It didn't take too much longer for me to correct that mistake, but that is the record I had. And it was troubling because I was thinking, did I have the right Lucy Gwin? Did she indeed get married just a few months after she graduated from high school? Now, Ancestry was helpful. Thank you very much, Ancestry, because it provided high school yearbook material. I was able to get Lucy's freshman, sophomore, junior, freshman, junior, senior high school pictures. And I saw her grow up in images. This is her senior year picture. This is her right here. And it also was helpful because it gave me other names of people I could pursue to talk about what was she like. And I, right here in the yearbook, I see that she was not nearly as active as some of her peers. That she was active with the Latin Club her first year. She was on the cheer block, which, you know, basically cheerleaders who rooted for the high school basketball team in year 2. And that's it. And when I started interviewing people from her high school years, what I learned is that very few of them remembered her, which sort of surprised me. She came, she went. She was interested in other things, obviously. Not interested in the Home Economics Club or a lot of the other organizations that were available to her at this Indianapolis Indianapolis high school that she graduated from in 1960. Now, what I did learn, of course, is that Lucy grew up in Indianapolis, and it was important to interview people from that era to know what Indianapolis was like back then, what were some of the influences, the cultural influences of Indiana State in general and Indianapolis in particular. And I learned that it was relatively conservative, lots of religious organizations, relatively Republican. And what I also learned is Lucy was not those things. Now, here is an example of why ancestry was so important. And I'm sure you folks have used it a million times. Okay, now I turned to public libraries too. I wanted to start getting what I could about Lucy in her Rochester years. And I know that the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, and before that, at the time of Lucy's residency in Rochester, there was also a Rochester Times Union that went out of business. So those were two key publications. And I turned to the Rochester historian, Christine Radarski, to see if she might be able to pull some information from her records. Now, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle.com, you can patrol to see if they have stuff, but you have to have a relationship with them to actually read the whole story. So I went to the historians to see what they had on record. And indeed, they had stuff. They have microfilm, and they know how to check all that stuff. And Christine put one of her top lieutenants on my request and returned with some valuable material for me. Believe me, when you're in the beginning steps of a project like this, every incremental piece of information is important. Sometimes it was just, like I said, 2 names out of a package, a document, a package of an 1.5 inches thick. 2 words were so critical. And now this image right here shows me 4 people, one of whom is dead, who I'm writing about, and 3 other potential sources. And it also was a wonderful photo because Lucy was in it with her hands on her knees, looking directly at the camera. It's a wonderful photograph by a photojournalist at the Rochester DNC. And one of the reasons I love it so much is because it was available for me to purchase, and it is now in the book. But it also shows Lucy right before her accident. And at that time, Lucy was writing personal ads to city newspaper. And this is her ad team. She's with a small ad firm in Rochester, New York. Some of the individuals, two of the individuals, the two men I was able to talk to for my project. And the fellow in the far left above Lucy was a man named Bruce Younger, who helped immensely with his recollections. Now, Lucy, I love that picture of her because she, and Lucy also, I told you Lucy's an amazing writer. Lucy wrote a book called Going Overboard, okay? Came out in Viking Press. This is Lucy. Viking Press, 1982. It's a major publishing house. This is a memoir from her 1 year as a deckhand on the large vessels that service the oil rigs off the coast of Louisiana. And after she first moved to Rochester, she opened up a restaurant in Rochester. And what drew her to Rochester, and which drew many, many people, including a lot of her friends, was a Zen center in Rochester that still exists. And she went there, she left a promising and lucrative Chicago advertising career at the age of 30. She said she was tired of lying for a living. And she quit her job, moved to Rochester with a lot of her friends to be in the Zen community. And she wanted to try something new. She was an adventurer. She opened up a restaurant, Hoosier Bill's. I actually got a picture of it from the archives. And she ran that for several years, and 5 years, as a matter of fact. And then decided she was going to try something new. And her something new was being a deckhand. Initially, she was working as a cook on the boats, but she didn't like doing that. She wanted to be a deckhand. She actually got to steer some of these 500-ton vessels out into the Gulf. And it was a year of difficulty for her on many fronts, including being in an all-male or nearly all-male field and experiencing sexual harassment and sexual assault. But she got a great book out of it. And it was so good, so compelling a story that Viking said yes to a first-time author. And it's one more step in her compelling story. But in that Going Overboard memoir, records of which, correspondences between her and her publisher and her editor and her agent are at the UMass repository. So important stuff. But I went to the University of Albany and asked them to purchase the book. Gosh, didn't they do that? And they helped me. They helped me figure out how to do a biography there. Public librarians, I can't say enough about them. They're in many ways librarians, reference librarians, front desk people, everybody I ever came across in this particular pursuit, and actually in my life. What wonderful people. I just want to say hats off to them. But anyway, they purchased Going Overboard for me. They didn't have it. It's out of print. I have my own copy now. But in it, Lucy describes herself. And one of the things she talks about is how she has a lot of imperfections. She doesn't like to be photographed. There aren't a lot of photographs of her. But one of the things she loves, or one of the things she's comfortable about herself, is her voice and her hands. Now, this is one of many photos I've seen in which her hands are forward. So I was happy to see that. Okay, thank you, Christine Radarski, for leading me to this photo. Okay, now, one of the other things I was amazed at, talking about public repositories of records. Lucy, after her marriage, she and her first husband moved to Illinois. I traced her movements. And the state of Illinois, unlike a lot of other places, other states like the state of New York, allows you to see divorce records. And I got from the Macon County, Illinois clerk, and many county clerks have helped me in this project, and indeed in many projects that I've been involved in as a reporter. The county clerks, I used to have to, in many of my years as a journalist, I used to have to get in a car and drive to a county clerk's office, park, put money in meters, go up and look at records, paper records. More and more, what is happening is that records are going online, and you can see them. And so indeed, I have become good at finding county court records through online record searches. Not every county clerk has digitized yet. Several in New York State have, not all. Several in other states have, not all. Macon County did not have digitized records. But what they did have was what I have discovered at others clerks' offices, and that is they had clerks who answer phones, talk to people, and go find the record that they are seeking. Sometimes they will send you the record. Sometimes they have a service in which you can purchase the record. So for $15, including a $5 handling fee, I got the entire divorce record, and there was a lot of information in there. It wasn't just one page and an order. It was some testimony, some letters, including a handwritten letter from Lucy. Again, I got to see her handwriting, and I could confirm it was her. So county clerks, wonderful, and open divorce records, a surprise. Now, one of the other things I was able to get, and I told you already, that the key information that I got was based on records from the University of Albany, the University of Massachusetts. But it helped me find a number of people I could contact about Lucy. One person led to another, and I wanted to contact people as soon as possible because her contemporaries, like her, included many people who are certainly Social Security eligible through age and disability. And I didn't want to lose these people. Indeed, during my search, some people I talked to died or were not available anymore because they had died. Some people had entered into Alzheimer's. So I wanted to start reaching out to people as soon as possible. One of the persons I was able to find in Washington, Pennsylvania, had a great deal of Lucy's records and stuff that had not been picked up by the University at all of Massachusetts. And it had her death certificate, and it was very helpful. Death certificates are still, as far as I know, difficult to get unless they happen to be in a lawsuit record, a public repository, or if you happen to be a relative of an individual who died, you can get a death certificate. Or if there's a contested will or something like that, they might show up in a public repository. District attorneys can get them. But if you're lucky, you can get them in the papers left behind. Now, I also wanted to talk about the oh, by the way, before I forget, getting back to the UMass archive and the records left behind. The UMass archive, UMass archivist, the director of the archives there, a man named Robert Cox, had the foresight to drive the 9 hours or so from Amherst, Massachusetts to Washington, Pennsylvania, which was the resting place of Lucy Gwin, or the last place she lived, let me put it that way, is where she was cremated in 2014. Not that many months, just a few months before her death, Rob Cox went out there and got all those records that he brought back to UMass. And he did that because UMass, like many repositories at higher education institutions and elsewhere, like to have records of people they think are significant. And UMass happens to have a great interest in people who were involved in social justice issues and social justice movements. Indeed, the library that was built in the 70s, and at the time it was built, it was the largest library in the world, is now the third largest, I understand. But it has been named the W.E.B. Du Bois Library. It is very interested in civil rights matters, and like I said, issues that bring people like Lucy Gwin into their crosshairs. And Rob Cox found out about Lucy Gwin and the possibility that she might want to put her records in a public repository. He reached out, he met her, and brought back in his Subaru hatchback some very important documents for all of us to see, knowing that someday, somewhere, somehow, someone was going to be interested in this woman. Rob Cox is one of the fellows who did not survive long enough to see this book written. He also perished during the course of this research. I'm glad I was able to meet him, and I'm glad that he did what he did. He did a lot of very great things, and my hat is off to him and the UMass archive and the UMass library. Okay, one other thing I wanted to talk about was newspapers.com. I'm sure you folks know about it, and I got to tell you, it was so valuable to me. I found the Louisville Courier Journal, and Lucy's people came out of Kentucky. Her mother grew up there. Her mother and father first lived there. And one of the things I was trying to trace was their backgrounds. And one of the things I learned in searching for Gwin is that Robert and Verna Gwin, Lucy's parents, who had Lucy in 1943, and another daughter a few years later had a daughter before those two who died as an infant. And I wonder if even if Lucy knew. I suspect she did, but I don't think a lot of people did. So it was one more piece of information to add to the pile. And the pile started growing and growing. The Louisville Courier had a lot of information about marriage information, birth information, birth announcements involving the family. The Indianapolis Star had a lot of information about the family over time, including the background of the father and the background and the background of the mother. They were creative people, and the father was an advertising guy. Okay. All right. Now, another piece of information that I got during the research was, again, sources helped me find out about Lucy's sister, her younger sister, Bridget, who died in a suicide, a tragic accident, a tragic catastrophe, not an accident. She jumped out a window, and that whole episode happened in Chicago. There's a publication called Chicago's American, and the Chicago's American had this image of the sister being assisted by looks like a cop and a passerby, and the hippies who were rounded up at the apartment from which she jumped. And it's a very important episode in talking about how Lucy became Lucy. Very important. Lucy was also crashing at that apartment where her sister perished. Now, the reason I found out about this again was the importance of sources and sourcing. Again, one person leads to another, and again, you never know what you're going to unearth. But this was a very important episode in the life of Lucy. She was in her 20s when her sister died. Her sister was only 21. The Chicago Tribune also had articles, but this one was illustrative. The kind of coverage you would get. This was 1968. A few months later, there was the famous Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and the banging of heads, and the anti-war movement, and the Abbie Hoffman and his peers getting arrested. Very interesting times in Chicago, and they were on the lookout for hippies, and this is perhaps a prelude to what happened a few months later. Okay, now Lucy, as I told you, Lucy took off from Chicago, eventually went to Louisiana and worked on the docks. Public repositories are wonderful, but private repositories are very helpful too. In my research, I was able to find people with private collections of Lucy's materials, including the executrix of her estate in Washington, Pennsylvania. Now, Rob Cox got a lot of great stuff and brought it back to UMass, and it tells a lot of the story of Lucy Gwin. But there was a lot of stuff left behind. And this was her Merchant Marine ID, and it does show something I already had, her date of birth, shows her handwriting again. The other side of it was very helpful too, because The other side of it tells you her hair color, her eye color, her height, and her weight. And all those details, you want to bring somebody back to life. What did they look like? How did they describe themselves? This is all, like I said, every incremental piece of information is helpful. Okay, now this is me just talking about research, right? I'm in the middle of researching Lucy Gwin. I took a little break, went to Berlin, and I'm in the subway, and I see this Einstein quote. I hope you can read it. It says, if we knew what it was we were doing, it would not be called research. Would it? Albert Einstein. Now, I thought I knew what I was doing. I still think I know what I was doing, but I got to tell you, the march through records was a march that it was almost like passing the baton. You would find that, college libraries had something to offer, and you wouldn't think so until you went there and you realized, holy smoke, the Union College Library in Schenectady has microfilm of the Rochester newspapers, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, which was very important because I was able to go back to the week that Lucy got into her car accident and find out what was going on in Rochester at that time. There was a major golf tournament. It was raining. The news was about wars and issues and who the presidents were, and just brought me back to that moment. Well, who was playing in the NCAA's tournaments? What was going on in Rochester at the time. But it allowed me to describe what the temperature and what the weather was like at the time of the accident. And if for nothing else, it brought me back to Rochester for a little while. And the University at Albany had it had records of some of the one of the competing magazines that served or was a voice for the disability community, and called The Ragged Edge. They had copies of it, and they had access to copies of it through their system. Union College Library was able to allow me to see copies of a publication that Lucy used as a blueprint for the style of her magazine. It was called Madness Network News. They had access to that. And this whole pursuit allowed me to find people I could talk to, in most cases remotely. Lots of 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour telephone conversations, some Zoom calls. And some of these people had records, and some of this was going on during COVID. So I didn't have as many person-to-person interviews as I would have liked to, but it allowed people who I was interacting with to do some of the same things you and I were doing during the COVID shutdown. And that was cleaning out our attics, cleaning out our cellars, cleaning out our garages. And some of these people happened onto documents that they probably would not have encountered if it wasn't because they had some time on their hands. And I got letters and photographs and copies of memorabilia that helped, helped add to the stack. I traveled to places where Lucy lived. I certainly went to Rochester. I met with some of her contemporaries from back in the day, and traveled with one of her friends, her longtime friends, to the 3 apartments she lived in, including the Mouth House, the place where she started her magazine in 1990. And we found the place where she got into her traffic accident. Unfortunately, the Rochester Police Department has no record of that traffic accident. And I'm told that that's not so unusual for many reasons. One, it was a personal injury accident where apparently no one was charged. And it didn't make the newspaper as far as I could tell. But the hospital records prove the accident. And her writing about it in what she thought would be another memoir. She started a couple of chapters of a memoir about her experience recovering from brain trauma. She tried to get Viking interested. They were not interested. The records of those correspondences are at the UMass archive. But regardless, I could prove that those things happened. We found the location. Me and her friend drove to the location of the accident. It was interesting to find it and see it. I also traveled naturally to Washington, Pennsylvania, where she moved at one point after living in Topeka, Kansas for quite a while. She moved from Rochester to Topeka and continued publishing from Topeka, continued publishing Mouth from Washington, Pennsylvania. I went to Washington, Pennsylvania and met with the leader of the Independent Living Center there, who was a friend of hers and was the key reason she moved to that town, just south of, or just 30 minutes, 40 minutes from Pittsburgh. And she had a warehouse of material of Lucy's, stuff that Rob Cox had not brought back to UMass. More writing, more letters, more journals, her personal books, her personal CDs, her laptop, her computer, her Rolodexes, an amazing amount of information. And this personal collection was mine, she shared with me. It bolstered, to say the least, what I had collected at the UMass archive. So Topeka, I also traveled to Topeka, Kansas, and met with some people that she interacted with there, including the leader of the Independent Living Center there. She loved that Independent Living Center and everything it represented. It was very much like which in concert with what her thinking was, and that is that deinstitutionalizing in providing community access for people with disabilities was a prominent goal of hers, and it was a prominent theme of Mouth magazine. So she lived there for a long time, published there. I interacted with some people, interviewed some people who knew her there, and also was able to collect some more information about her. Going out into the field is so important. I have my own collection of Mouth magazines. I have every Mouth magazine, just about everyone. I think I have, I might be missing a couple of the early ones. I also traveled to Washington, DC, and met with a woman who had correspondences between Lucy and her husband and herself. She happens to be Yoshiko Dart, the widow of Justin Dart, who many people credit as being the father of the Americans with Disability Act, and a leading figure in the disability rights movement. And that interview with Yoshiko and those records in the private repository, or her private collection, were absolutely vital to telling the story of Lucy Gwin. So in short, what I'm trying to indicate is that a combination of public repositories, private repositories, personal interviews, and a lot of luck can put together a compelling narrative of if you're trying to unearth a life. And look at, this is a woman who lived 71 years. And even if you live 71 years and you write in your journal everything that is going through your mind and everything you're experiencing in those 71 years, and then someone like a biographer happens upon those journals, it is still only part of the story, because how you your legacy, how you impacted those people, how others viewed you, you are not necessarily a good source for. You can talk about how you had a wonderful meal, or how you felt slighted when someone said something, or you remembered when your father once said. Those are all good things, but unearthing a life is and writing about a life is a difficult thing to do. And I do want to indicate that I was also able to find records at the Monroe County clerk's office that were very important. Monroe County, New York, which is where Rochester is, always do the county court records. There's also, you have to look at, in case someone is a litigious person, and Lucy was a litigious person, and her last big fight involved a federal court case. And there is something called PACER. It's a public access to court electronic records. It's run by the federal court system. You can get a PACER account in a matter of minutes. It allows you to look at all kinds of federal court filings, criminal, civil, bankruptcy. I was able to find some stuff on Lucy that was very important to the tale of Lucy Gwin. And all I can say is you should also talk to every librarian and public historian you can, because you never know what they know. You never know what you don't know until you realize that there's a piece of information out there that you should have asked for, that was available to you. I'm always learning. I have been at this business for an awful long time, I guess 40 years or more. And I learn all the time that there's something out there. I always feel that I'm one page away when I'm going through a public repository. I'm one page away from finding something startling, or one phone call away from finding someone who knows something that is compelling, or one question away, one sentence away, 2 words. So my recommendation to all you historians is keep plugging. And I wanted to say to you before I forget that I have a great respect for historians and for biographers in particular, because they are the investigative reporters of the past. It is hard enough to find the truth in the present if you're a reporter. For those of you searching for the truth, or the truths of things that happened years ago, decades ago, centuries ago, my hat is off to you. And I've read a lot of biographies and a lot of histories, essays, and the work that goes into that, yeah, I have a great deal of respect for. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to share some of the things that went into researching This Brain Had a Mouth. I want to also let you know that the University of Massachusetts Press has been for the last few months advertising the availability of this book, which is going to be released on October 29. And it is called This Brain Had a Mouth, Lucy Gwin and the Voice of Disability Nation. It is less than 200 pages. And so the UMass Press has a expectation that it would be available and useful in disability studies programs for undergrads to read. And there's a good chance, because it's less than 200 pages, that people will actually read it. So it is available, and keep that in mind as you go forward with your reading lists. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you about This Brain Has a Mouth and researching it. Have a great rest of your day.